So in order to accurately do what I'd like to do today, I'm going to need a faithful, excited, exuberant volunteer. That's not a child. We can't use a child today. And believe it or not, when I said that, I kind of expected that not every hand in the house would go up. So, here's the good news. Clayt, would you mind coming up here? Everybody give Mr. Clayt Hill a round of applause. He needs a little bit of coaxing, a little bit of encouragement as he makes his way up to our high and lofty stage this morning. Do you want to sing? We got a good microphone. Come on over. Hey, Dad, come on over. Don't hide behind that podium. Everybody in here, do you know my friend, Mr. Clayt Hill? He's got two amazing kids down there. Good friend of the church. Glad to have him. Clayt, would you tell me, did you have a good weekend this weekend?
I had a great weekend.
Yeah? Anything so great about it? I mean, I know the football games were a little tough this weekend. Or were they good for you?
They were good for me.
Oh, they were good for you? Okay. I know we've got some Oklahoma fans back there that it was good for them too. Yeah?
Don't hold that against
Well, we won't hold that against them. Why was your weekend so good?
Every weekend's good. I get to spend it with my kids.
Every weekend's good. You get to spend it with your kids. Hey, I got a question for you.
Okay.
This week, just in the last 7 days, have you done any work or done anything specific for me? You and me.
Not this week.
Not this week. Are you sure you haven't mowed my grass? You haven't washed one of our cars? You haven't fed our 2 dogs? Nobody wants to feed our dogs.
I fed a couple of dogs that come by the store. But
You haven't fed our dogs. If our dogs got out, they would not be coming back. So just to make sure you haven't done anything specific for us. Okay. Well, this I'd like to hand to you. It says something on the front. Can you read what it says on the front?
Grace.
What does it say?
Grace.
Grace. See, today we want to talk about this idea or concept that's very prevalent in the Christian faith. It's an idea called grace. Okay? So I'd like to give this to you from Emily and I. I'd like you to open it up. Uh-oh. Christmas came a little early this year.
Yeah, looks like it.
You don't have to read the card. Can you open up and show everybody what's inside there?
$20 bill.
See, you guys, if everybody would have raised their hands and we would have split $20. We've got some volunteers now. We got some excited people. You know, when we talk about this idea of grace, this is a great way to illustrate that, first and foremost, grace always chooses us. We are always reluctant to receive God's grace. It's a foundational aspect of what grace is. Secondly, grace is always an unmerited, undeserved favor. That is a gift from Emily and I. And secondly, it always costs something. That is what Emily and I were going to potentially eat lunch on today. And so I don't want you to feel guilty or feel bad. No.
Okay.
We probably got another family friend here that's probably going to buy us lunch today. But here's the deal. Grace always has to cost something. Whether that $20 was a portion of the water bill or that was the $20 that was going to feed us lunch, that is a gift from Emily and I, and we just want to give it to you.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't feel like I've earned it.
You have not earned it. Did you do anything this week to earn it?
No, I did.
Well, then that's a great illustration. You can go sit down.
Can I give it back to the church?
Well, you can do whatever you want, just not in front of me.
All right, thank you.
It is yours, bud. Do with it what you want. You got a couple of kids down there who might have other ideas. You see, the truth is, we all need grace. We could have done $20. We could have done $50. We could have done $100. We could have made it a larger denomination. It wasn't about the amount that we put in there that we were trying to illustrate, even though illustrations can be costly and expensive for preachers. But here's the deal. We all need grace. Many of you, almost everybody in here, I imagine over their lifetime, over their years, have heard about grace. You've even come to the point of being able to define maybe what grace is. But not everybody can take it to the next step, which is experiencing grace. You see, growing up in the church all of our life, it's easy to hear about what is grace. And it's even easier sometimes to listen and create a definition and to know what grace is. But the hard step is coming over here to the end and saying, you know what? Like Clayt today, like you today, I have experienced grace. Today, we're going to be in Luke chapter 15. So if you want to take your Bibles and start trying to find Luke chapter 15. And today, our idea is, how can we, more than just know grace, how can we today, you and I, experience grace? And as you're moving to Luke chapter 15, today we are going to look at a parable that Jesus spoke. It's called the parable of the prodigal son. But as I look and spent more and more time with it, to me, I called it the parable of grace. You see, grace is all over this story. It's kind of the central theme of what this story is about. And so today, we are going to use this story, this parable that Jesus spoke to a very unique audience. And we're going to use this story, and we are going to try to run through the ideas. And I want you to see if you can notice some of the aspects, some of those three fundamental aspects that I just shared with Clayt about what grace is. Because if it doesn't have those three aspects, then I don't believe it's grace. And so today, as we're walking through this parable, and we're looking at the two main characters of this parable, which are the younger son and the older son, see if you can notice the idea of grace that sprinkled out the entire parable. So if you will, and remember, the three fundamental aspects of what grace is. First, it has to choose you. Secondly, it has to always be unmerited, undeserved gift or favor. And third, it always has to cost somebody something. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11. And Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, I demand that you share your property that is coming to me. And so the father divided up his property between them. We're going to kind of go verse by verse through this. The sharing or the dividing or the moving of the inheritance was something that was very kind. It was an act of love, but it was not grace. We don't want to confuse here the kindness of the father to split up the inheritance to the younger son before he had passed away. We don't want to confuse that for grace, because it was coming to him. That would not be undeserved. The inheritance in that day was going to happen. He was just asking for it a little bit sooner. So that was not grace. Don't get those two confused. It was certainly an act of kindness and an act of love, a showing of love by the Father to do it early, because he did not have to. But that was not grace. Verse 13, after the father had divided the property between them, not many days later, the younger son gathered everything he had just gotten and everything that he has. He gathered it all up, and he took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered all his property in reckless living. Grace knows no boundaries. Grace even extends to the farthest of countries. Grace even extends to the farthest, deepest places of your life. Grace knows no boundaries. Grace also knows no limits. Look at what it says again. He squandered everything he had in reckless living. That idea of reckless living is the same idea that you and I get the word porneo from. It's the same idea that we get the word evil from. So the younger son took everything he had, went to a far country, and what did he do? He lived a life of pure evil. It didn't take long, and he squandered everything he had. He was greedy, and he took everything he had, and he dealt with it in a way that was not honoring, and he lost it all. And he lost it all through an evil, reckless lifestyle. Grace knows no limits. Grace can still reach you even when you are as far off and as bad off as you ever could imagine being. Verse 14. And when the younger son had wasted everything away, there a severe famine arose in that country, and he, the younger son, began to be in need. Grace can meet every single need you have. Grace today can meet your needs and meets you at the point of your need. Verse 15. So the younger son then went away, and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, who sent him into the field to feed the pigs. Back home, the son was royalty. He didn't have to do this work. Now he had lost everything he had, and he's feeding the field. He's feeding the pigs. He's doing a job he never would have thought he would be doing. And the son was longing to be fed by the pods where the pigs had eaten. And yet no one gave him anything. There are a lot of things going on here, but when it comes to grace, I want you to hear this. This idea that he had the attitude that nobody will give me anything is the attitude of pride. Pride is always an enemy of grace. You have grace on one side, you always have pride on the other side. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride will always come before the fall. You see, in the life of the younger son, he had everything. And it also created an attitude of pride. And yet, we're seeing in the younger son's life that he is falling to the deepest and darkest places. Let's keep going. Verse 17. But when the younger son had come to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with great hunger. I will arise, and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I have sinned before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Please, God, please, Father, treat me instead as one of your hired servants. Stopping right here, we have to realize this. Good intentions are not the same thing as receiving grace. Here in this story, if it stops right here, the younger son had a great epiphany, had a great idea, but he would have never received the grace of his father. Good intentions are not the same thing as receiving grace. But look at what receiving grace does look like. Starting in verse 20, moving through 24. After having the ideas, after having the good intentions, the younger son, he arose and he took the time, he took the steps, and he came to his father. But while the son was still a long ways off, his father saw him. He felt compassion on him, and he ran and he embraced him and he kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So he moved from the theoretical of trying to understand that he was not worthy, and he picked up the phone, or he took the steps, he put the keys in the car, and he came to his father and he said, you know what? I finally realized that I am not even worthy to be called your son. But instead, I am okay with you making me one of the least of your servants. You see, he just wanted back into the family. And when you and I go from the theoretical of understanding and knowing about grace to realizing and accepting and receiving grace, this is what's called the experiential type of grace. When you and I come over here, look at what happens in the story. Grace always, when you experience grace, it will always surpass anything you ever hoped for. He would have been okay just coming back to the family as a hired servant. But look at what the father does. Verse 22, but the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. And let us eat and let us celebrate. For today my son was dead, but now he is alive again. My son was lost, but he is now found. So they began to celebrate. The first point that sums up this entire first character of the story is that the younger son was desperate and needy. He was offered grace, and he received the grace of his father. There are some things about this story, about the first part of this story, that directly line up with what we illustrated with Clay. Grace chooses the younger son. The younger son never chose. He was reluctant, but grace chose him. Secondly, did you see it? All he wanted was to come back and to be a hired servant in the house. And yet, he completely didn't deserve it. He completely didn't do anything to gain the favor of his father, except he did the exact opposite. He ran as far away as he could. He wasted everything as fast as he could. And he lived a life of immorality and evil. And yet his father still brought him back and showed him the kind of love and the kind of prestige that he did not deserve. Grace is always undeserved and unmerited gift from the Father. But did you see what it cost? It cost the father the best thing he had. The fattened, the nice, the prestigious, the calf that could have got him a lot of money. And yet the father took it and killed it and prepared it for the feast. That calf was the sign and the symbol of the grace and the feast and the festivity that the younger son was about to enjoy and endure. You see, when I think about the younger son, here are some of the words that I jot down, that I write down, or that I thought of. Some of the words that describe the younger son. See what you think. He was immoral. He was rejected. He was evil. He was a social outcast. He was dirty. He was nasty. He was filthy. He was ugly. He was unneeded. He was unworthy. He was nothing like you would want at your table. He was nothing like I would want in my house. The younger son, however we want to describe him, is as far off and as evil and as immoral of a person than you and I could have ever imagined. But he's only one character in the story. But the truth of the matter is, when Jesus was looking out, there was an immediate audience, and then there was a targeted audience that he spoke this to. Look with me at chapter 15, starting in verse 1 and verse 2. Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all drawing near to him. They were coming. They knew he had something to say. They had heard of the things that he had done. So the tax collectors, the people of that day that you would not have liked to hang around with, people that you would not have liked or enjoyed in your vehicle, people that you would never have shared a cup of coffee with. These were the people that were coming to Jesus. And look at what it says. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners, and he even dines, and he eats with them." And then he's going to go on, and he's going to share these parables. Jesus had a heart and a desire and a ministry to be involved in the life of the younger sons of the culture. And so he speaks a parable, and he goes into great detail about the younger son. And you could just imagine while he's there that he's speaking about the younger son and what this younger son just did, just as I just read it. And as he's doing that, you could just see the tax collectors. You could see their eyes light up. You could see them standing up straight, bowing their back out, and just going, that is what we need. We need the grace of God in our life because of who we are and what the world and what the culture says about us. You could just see how excited, how desirable this story would sound to them. And you know, today in this room, I imagine that there's not many of you in this room that really could identify with the younger son. I imagine many of you in this room haven't lived lives to the level of the evil and the immorality that the younger son has. I imagine many of you in this room wouldn't call yourself wretched, dirty, nasty, filthy, unneeded, unvaluable, unwanted. Because as I encounter and hang out with most of you, and I in the same boat, I wouldn't think of myself as the younger son. And that's why the story doesn't stop there. And that's why grace does not stop there. But there's another part to this story. There was another audience there that day. There was the immediate audience sitting down in the front where Jesus was telling the story, who would first hear the words. But Jesus' target audience, the reason why he tells the story, is for the people standing up along the backside of the hill. For the Pharisees and the scribes and the religious people of that day who lined the backside of the hills just enough to hear the words of Jesus, but to make sure that they were not associated with who Jesus was, because he was sitting down, he was eating, he was dining, and he was living life with the people that were not popular. And so I imagine, after he finishes with the first son, he begins the second part of the story. And listen to what he says. Now, the older son, as if you had forgotten that there were two sons in the story, the older son, he himself was out in the field. When he says this, he very clearly describes the fact that the older son is out doing the work. He is not in the house. He is not letting a slave do the work. He is not lazy. But instead, he is out riding the tractor. He is out dealing with the animals. He is out working from sun up to sundown. Does that sound like any of us in this room? He was not a lazy guy. And as he came near to draw near to the house, he heard great music and great dancing. And he called one of his servants out in the field and asked them, "What does this mean?" And the servant said to him, your brother who sometime in the past has left, has now come back. And your father has killed the fattened calf, the best one that this family has. He sacrificed it, he's killed it, and on the whim, it seems like he's about to have a party. Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received your son back safe and sound. You can just see the emotions of the older son. The son who had done everything right. The son who had checked every single box. And before I even go on from that, let me finish the story. The older son was angry, and he refused to go in. Just stop right there. Just listen. The older son, who had done everything he could possibly do, who had lived every way within the family that he could possibly live, who was out in the field from sun up to sundown, who was working the field, who never asked for his inheritance, the younger son comes home completely immoral, completely wretched, asks for the forgiveness of the father, and the father, out of great grace, kills the fattened calf and is ready to have a party. And this very much angered the older son. But the truth of the gospel is this: the same grace that was offered to the younger son is now being offered to the older son. The same desperate and neediness of grace that the younger son portrays, believe it or not, is the same desperate neediness for grace that the older son has. Follow with me. Starting in verse 29. But he was angry, and he refused to go in. And his father came out, and he entreated the older son. That word there may be a word that you and I don't ever use in our life. Have you entreated somebody this last week? I don't know, because I don't know what that word means. So listen to this. Go to Luke chapter 8. The same father who provided great grace to the younger son has come out to the older son in the field. Luke chapter 8, same word, verse 41. And there a man named Jairus, who was the ruler of the synagogue, falling at the feet of Jesus, he begged, he implored Jesus to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. The same word for begging and imploring to give everything you have to receive somebody else. This is a highly emotional word. This is a type of word that is very important to the story. The father chose the older son just like he chooses the younger son. He comes out to the field and he says, I beg you. He looks at him in the face and he says, I don't only love the younger son. I don't only love the evil, immoral, wretched, dirty younger son, but I come here to you today. I love you. And I want to provide for you the same grace that I'm providing to the younger son. Listen to what he says. He begs him. And this is what happened. The older son answered the father. The father has just laid it all out. I give you my grace. I want you to have what I have. I want you to be a part of the party that we're about to have for the younger son. And look at what the older son says. He was angry. Look, all of these years I have served you. I have never disobeyed a single command. And yet you wouldn't even give for me the younger goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. How many of you believe, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you come to God and you do this? God, I lift up everything I've ever done for you. I lift up every box I've ever checked off for you, every single time I've donned the doors of the church, every single mission trip that I've ever been on, every single Sunday school lesson I've ever taught for you, every single financial dollar I've ever spent for you and for the local church, every prayer I've prayed for you or for other people, everything I've tried to do in your name, every right way I've tried to live, everything that I've ever done that you would be happy, and I lift it up, and now you are to do something for me. You see, when grace gets polluted and perverted to believe that we are bargaining with God, I bring to you so that I deserve what you can bring to me, that you rightly relate to God because He owes you something, never works. You desperately need the grace of Jesus, the grace of God the Father through Jesus. And here's the truth. Whether you're the immoral son or you're the self-righteous, judgmental, independent, prideful older son like myself, we all need the grace of God. And He offers the same to both. But the truth of the story is only one receives and the other rejects. The younger son, listen to how the story ends, because this is important. The older son, I've served you, I've never disobeyed you, and you wouldn't even give me a young goat. But when the son of yours came home, who has devoured all of your property, even with the prostitutes, that's how evil he was, you killed the fattened calf for him. And the father says, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine can be yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead, and he is alive. He was lost, and he was found. At the very end of this story, you can just imagine that Jesus looks from the bottom, and he lifts his eyes, and he looks to the back, to where the Pharisees are. And the story ends like this. The younger son was dead, and he is now alive. He was lost, and he was now found. But it leaves the audience wondering what happens to the older brother. It directly connects and it penetrates the heart of the self-righteous, the religious people that are standing in the background, wondering what this thing of Jesus is all about. And they stand in the background and they get so angry and so frustrated because they lift everything they have to God. And they say, God, you should be pleased because look at what I have to offer. And God says, listen, I have grace for both the younger son and the older son. You both need it. But today, if you come by faith, you can receive it. And if you come by works, trying to lift it all up to God, you can't receive it that way. So as my wife comes to finish up and to lead us in worship, this is how we're going to finish up today. You might be the younger son here. You might be immoral and evil and desperately needed grace. Or you might be the older son. You might be self-righteous, judgmental, have everything to offer to God. And God says, you don't come to me by works. You come to me by faith in the Son. And I offer grace to both the younger son and the older son, exactly the same. And if you come by faith and you receive and not reject the offer of grace today, then there will be a party. You will no longer be dead in your transgressions, dead in sin, but today you will be alive. You will no longer be lost and wandering in life, but today you will be found. Because the grace of God is being offered to both the same. The question is, will you just know about grace today, or by faith will you receive it and experience grace? You can know about grace all your life, but at some point you either have to reject it or you have to receive it. Don't lift your works up to God any longer, but today lift up your hands and by faith in the Son receive the grace that God has for you.